Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, salam. Welcome to MACFEST 2025. My name is Katarzyna. I am a member of the MACFEST team, and I'm sitting in France. Let us know in the chat where you're watching us from. Just say hello from France, hello from the UK, from the USA, wherever you are. Also, if you have any questions today, or if you have any thoughts you'd like to share with us, because the topic is absolutely fascinating, please put them in the chat or in the Q&A portal. We will pick them up towards the end of the session. So our host for today is Sofia Ascoli-Ball. Welcome back, Sofia. Some of you might remember her from our other events. Sofia lives in Manchester with her husband and children. She holds a master degree in international marketing and foreign languages, and she completed those studies in her home country of France. And her main two interests are improving Muslim women's physical well-being as an instructor of Pilates and Taekwondo, and spreading good quality knowledge about Islam. She joined Islam 28 years ago. And she's a French translator for various literature, including the Book of Jesus, Prophet of Islam. And also, she is part of the Bait al-Hima Productions. It's a project set up in partnership with Dr. Salah Al-Jazari, historian and author of dozens of books on Islamic civilization. And some of you might remember Dr. Salah from our previous events. So welcome back, Sofia. Welcome, Emma, and over to you.
Assalamu alaikum. Hello, good morning, good evening, wherever you are. It's always a pleasure to be part of MACFEST and take part in all of these really interesting, challenging, inspiring talk that you put together. So well done to the whole team again this year. Today, we have the great pleasure and honor, to be honest, to be welcoming Emma Clark, who is a garden designer specializing in Islamic gardens with an emphasis on sustainable naturalistic planting. She has designed a garden for the new Cambridge Mosque UK, completed in 2019. She is senior tutor on the master's program at the King's Foundation School of Traditional Arts in London, where she focuses on teaching the principles of sacred and traditional art. Emma has published 2 books on Islamic gardens, The Art of the Islamic Garden and a monograph, Underneath Which Rivers Flow, The Symbolism of an Islamic Garden, as well as many articles on Islamic art and architecture, gardens, and the garden carpet. She has been a member of the academic board of the Temenos Academy for over 15 years, as well as a trustee, and she entered Islam through Sufism in 1990. Emma, we are delighted and very honored to have you here. So with not much further ado, we will be listening to your, I'm sure, very inspiring presentation. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum to everyone. And thank you so much, Sophia, for your very kind introduction, and to everyone at the MACFEST team for inviting me. I rarely give talks online, but I made a special exception because I have such great affection for Manchester. You will have heard, and many of you will know this, are the opening verses of Surah Al-Rahman, chapter 55 from the Qur'an, which has the longest description of the Gardens of Paradise. And you will have heard that word, al-mizan, 3 times in almost as many seconds just now. This is a very important word for my talk today, meaning essentially right proportion, measure, balance. And that is a balance not only between all living things in nature, but also between humankind and nature. And this forms the underlying theme of my talk. But first of all, let's look at the title, The Ecological Wisdom of the Islamic Gardens of Paradise. This was inspired by a conference on sustainability that I took part in Malaysia quite recently, and has given much food for thought. I hadn't really considered it that much until then. What does it mean, and how does it relate to the vital concern of our times, the fast declining state of our natural environment? Well, fundamentally, again, as many of you probably know, the term ecological is about relationship. That is the relationship between all living beings, including humans, with their physical surroundings. Lord Northbourne, an English farmer and pioneer in the ecology movement, he wrote in 1970, to quote, "Formerly, man lived more or less in harmony with nature and played his part in maintaining what we call a balance of nature. That natural balance, if we could but see it so, represents a fulfillment of the divine ordinances, whereby all living things are related to one another through their common origin in God." I just want to show this book. This is the essential Lord Northbourne. Perhaps none of you can probably not see it, but he's a very, he's an important figure and much neglected. And if anyone would like to know more details about the book, then of course, let me know later. But in a sense, he was echoing the Qur'an, you could say. This explicit acknowledgement that all living beings are related through, as he says, their common origin in God is the crucial factor missing in the vast majority of environmental and ecological movements across the world today. Attempting to recover our ecological balance is already an uphill struggle, but without viewing the natural world and all who live in it as a whole, as a divine unity, it is well nigh impossible. This is where the particular wisdom of the Islamic Garden comes into its own, since, like all traditional Islamic art, there is no separation between the sacred and the secular, or the secular and the sacred, the horizontal world that we live in and the vertical world, the outer and the inner. We'll look at this a little more as we go on. This is the Prince of Wales's, what used to be the Prince of Wales's garden at Clarence House, where you see a fourfold design, which we'll also come on to. But I wanted to mention him also, because we cannot really look at ecological balance without also looking at sustainability, since we cannot truly restore the one without fully embracing the other. And interestingly, in 2010, when His Majesty the King was the Prince of Wales, he gave an excellent speech on Islam and the environment, which included damning observations about how the obsession with economic growth means we continue to take from the finite resources of the earth and sea, the divine hospitality, as the Prince of Wales then put it rather nicely. We carry on taking with little concern for giving back. So no concern for sustainability whatsoever. But in order to attempt to restore the ecological balance with sustainability at its heart, we need to give back to the earth as much as we take out. This is called reciprocity, another key term. And reciprocity is the biologist and citizen of the Potawatomi Nation, Robin Wall Kimmerer's main theme in her marvelous book, Braiding Sweetgrass. I'm sure some of you know it. If you don't, you should buy it. It's fantastic. Just as Mother Nature gives to us, we should give back to her. And this simple act means the earth remains sustainable. She calls this the honourable harvest. But such is the greed that dominates humankind. This notion of reciprocity has become a fairy tale for the majority. However, I would argue that if we took heed of what the Qur'an teaches, we would understand that reciprocity is also a key principle of the Islamic view of the environment. So before looking at the Gardens of Paradise and their ecological wisdom, I'd like to share something about the close relationship about Islam and nature since this underpins this talk. As the foremost voice on this subject, Professor Syed Hussein Nasr has said, out of approximately 6,000 verses in the Quran, 1/3 of them speak of nature. This is more than any other scripture in the world, apart possibly from Taoism and Shintoism. When you read it, there is a strong sense of the presence of the natural world and how we can learn from it. Animals, plants, water, fruit, and trees, and the colour green are mentioned over and over again. The colour green, particularly in regard to the Gardens of Paradise, where not only is the vegetation green, but inhabitants wear green garments of silk and brocade. Nature is palpable in a way that reading the Bible, for instance, is not. Examples from the plant and animal kingdom are used repeatedly as signs and lessons to humans. Indeed, nature is teaching us in this holy book, the Quran. There are chapters with titles such as the stars, the bee, the cow, the spider, the ant, and the dawn. And the chapter called The Sun begins by the sun, this is to quote in English, by the sun and his brightness, and the moon when she followeth him, and the day when it revealeth him, and the night when it enshroudeth him. This verse is a reminder of the natural rhythm of the day and the night, light and dark. This should be especially apparent for Muslims, since we pray 5 times a day, and we do this according to the passage of the sun across the sky. However, which of us tells the time of prayer by the position of the sun? Not many. We click on Shake Google on our mobile phones. And to be fair, with high buildings all around, at least 85% of people in the UK live in cities, and cloudy skies, usually, it's all but impossible to do otherwise. Modern urban existence is not conducive to being at one with nature, to say the least. The opposite is the desert nomad, whose daily life truly is ruled by the passage of the sun. And I recall Professor Nasr saying that you'll never find an atheist nomad. To take just a few more examples from the Quran, and we're spoiled for choice, about the lessons humanity can learn from nature and how completely intertwined we are. In the chapter entitled The Spider, there is a warning that those who follow another god than the one true God are as frail as the frailest of all houses, that is the spider's web. Sorry about that credit. In chapter 27, the ant, when Solomon is marching with his army, he can hear the ants speaking to each other, hurrying to return to their underground homes so they are not trodden upon. A reminder that even a king with his army is aware of the tiniest of creatures and respects them. In the chapter entitled The Bee, al-Nahl, the precious winged insects are directly addressed by the Almighty to quote, choose habitations in the hills and in the trees, and eat of all the fruits, and follow the ways of thy Lord made smooth for thee. So God speaks directly to the animals as well as to us. We are, it appears, on the same level. The bees also bring healing to us in the form of honey. As the Quran says, this is a sign for, to quote, people who reflect. A constant refrain throughout the Quran, people who reflect or people who are aware. In the same chapter, it's written that the fruits of the date palm and grapes give forth good nourishment. Again, a sign, this time for people who have sense. Importantly, the Quran teaches that human beings have been given the responsibility of guardianship, Khalifa, over the natural environment. Khalifa meaning God's vicegerent or steward upon the earth. There's also a saying, a hadith of the Prophet, which says, to quote, "The earth is green and beautiful, and God has appointed you his stewards or khalifa over it. But in order to carry out this sacred task in a manner pleasing to God, we need first of all to be good stewards of ourselves." And what does this mean? Just as a garden needs constant care in the form of nourishment with organic matter, watering, pruning and weeding, and knowing when to let go and let nature take her course, so do our own souls, our inner beings. We need, according to the Qur'an, to nourish ourselves through regular prayer in order to act righteously, to weed and prune out the inner obstacles, and crucially to transform or purify our egos, our nafs, through the remembrance of God, the greatest of acts, as it says in the Quran, dhikr Allah. Everything we do inwardly has an impact outwardly, and vice versa. As the great Jalaluddin Rumi writes, the real gardens and flowers are within. They are in man's heart, not outside. The environmental mess, as you see here, a tiny example of it, we find ourselves in today shows all too clearly that we've neither been good stewards of ourselves nor of the natural environment. The macrocosm, the outer world, being a reflection of the inner world, the microcosm of humankind. As it says in the Quran, to quote, "We shall show them our signs on the horizons and in themselves, until it becomes clear to them that it is, the Quran is, the truth." Thus, there is a constant dialogue between the macrocosm and the microcosm. If we took heed of such teachings, if we were, to quote, people who reflect, we would work on our inner landscape, hoping it does not look like this slide that's on your screens now. And we learn something from the desecration we have wrought upon the outer landscape. Clearly, what is needed is a huge change in attitude towards nature if something positive is to take place. Again, as the Quran says in chapter 13, the thunder, to quote, "God will not change a condition of a people until they first change themselves." At last, we'll move on to something more beautiful. Throughout the Quran, there are warnings through analogy, signs, and symbols. There is a refrain that everything in creation is a sign or a symbol, ayah. Ayah also, of course, being a verse, the word for verse, it is also a sign, or symbol rather, of the Almighty, with the proviso, to quote, "None will grasp their meaning save the wise." These are, again, people who reflect, people who have sense, people who are aware. The word symbol comes from the Greek, meaning to throw together. The opposite, of course, is diabol, or diabolic, to pull apart. This language of symbols is about linking the two worlds, the upper and the lower, the horizontal earthly world with the vertical celestial world. But also, and which comes to the same thing, the outer with the inner, the impermanent with the permanent. And it's up to us to learn how to read this language of symbols, as well as the language of, as Robin Wall Kimmerer writes, very nice phrase, practical reverence. Not only should we see nature as a symbolic veil, more or less transparent, according to our capacities, according to how aware we are, but we should revere her and hold her in awe. We cannot survive without nature, but modernity, with its plethora of supermarkets offering every fruit and vegetable under the sun, usually in a plastic bag, means the vast majority of town dwellers have no clue what tree or plant this bounty comes from. let alone the season they are harvested in. And I listened to a lecture recently, and he was told the story of, I think he was like an 8-year-old boy who simply didn't recognize a lettuce when he saw it, when it wasn't, he went to a market where everything was not in plastic bags, and he just didn't recognize it. He didn't know what anything was. So it's nature who generously provides us with the means whereby we live and eat and breathe. When you think about it, it is astonishing. We do not say thank you hundreds of times a day. And I'm sure there are many of you who do, who say grace before eating and a thank you at the end. And of course, in Islam, we say Bismillah and at the beginning and Alhamdulillah at the end, as all traditional societies did before the pre-modern age. Many with elaborate rituals of thanksgiving. This is the language of practical reverence and beginnings of reciprocity. And in fact, in this country, for those of you who live in this country, in the UK, if you live in the country and not in a town, you still have the harvest festivals, but this used to be a hugely important festival in the calendar. Now, of course, it's reduced to just a pale semblance of what it used to be. And city dwellers probably don't acknowledge it at all. So today in Western Europe, with the decline of the practice of Christianity and its various denominations, it seems that nature, in a way, is gradually becoming a kind of religious or spiritual path. Last year in June, about nearly a year ago, there was a huge nature march in London. And the most common of these slogans you can see on the flags was "Restore Nature Now." And in fact, it was very moving to see so many diverse groups coming together, many of them at loggerheads. And this little lady in the front, you can see she came from the Society of Protecting the Swifts, and you can see her banner. It's really very moving. And there's no doubt that everyone who walked and marched, for all of them, motivation came from the heart. It seems that as the destruction of the environment continues at such an unprecedented rate, perhaps the beauty and transcendence of nature herself will gradually pave the way for an open recognition that she is indeed sacred, that the life force that flows through her, that flows in her, is the same one that flows through us all. It's a precious gift from above. And the love of nature, which is truly universal, is so clearly portrayed in the Qur'an, can really only help us towards this recognition. The march to restore nature was a kind of proof of this love of nature. We need, as the Qur'an says, to quote, eyes to see. And this means seeing with the inner eye, the eye of the heart. Being in nature, even a park or a garden, and especially sitting by water, which is the key element in the Islamic garden, as we shall see, we may allow the plants, trees, and birds to open our inner eye and our heart and contemplate this universal life force. Recognize, realize. It's something that we already have. So it's really a sort of uncovering of the world, in a sense, which has formed this barrier, this shield across our hearts and our minds. We have to work on them to open them up again and to nurture them. Everything in creation is profoundly interconnected. As mentioned at the beginning, this is the meaning of the word ecological. And the Quran reiterates this fundamental concept of interrelationship and community. Community is hugely important, as most of you who are listening to this, I imagine most of you are Muslim and you will know. For instance, in chapter 6, the cattle. Ooh, 1, 2, 4. Oh, I've missed one. That's sad. There is no animal that crawls on the earth, no bird, that flies with its two wings, but are communities like you. The complete integration of humankind with nature, the reciprocal connection, which becomes increasingly apparent as you read the Quran, goes hand in hand with perhaps the most well-known religion rooted in nature, that is, the Native American Indians, whose whole cosmology is centered upon the natural world. For them, nature is truly a book of knowledge, which they read fluently, everything in it being a clear sign of the Great Spirit. The sun dance is their supreme sacred rite. The central tree, which you can just see here, represents the cosmic axis, linking earth to heaven. Those dancing move between the central axis and out again to the perimeter of the circle. And the tree, as Fritjof Schuon observes beautifully, to quote, is like a great heart whose vital phases are represented by the ebb and flow of the dance in and out. The significance of the tree is mentioned many times in the Quran, and in the rules of warfare codified by the first caliph. In the 7th century, armies were exhorted to avoid cutting them down. William Blake, as I hope all of you know who William Blake is, the great early 19th century poet, late 18th, early 19th century English poet, he wrote, "The tree which moves some to tears of joy is in the eyes of others only a green thing which stands in the way." Unfortunately, this is how many people see it, especially developers. And this comes to mind, since aren't we all moved to tears sometimes by the beauty of nature? And the question to ask is why? Why are even atheists moved to tears? I have a family where many people, many of them are agnostic or atheist, but of course they love being in virgin nature. And I can't really say to them that this is because nature's beauty bears witness to the divinity and directs our gaze away from the finite towards the infinite, away from the periphery towards the center, from the outward visible form to the inward invisible essence. So if the inner eye of the heart is opened and we begin to understand what the Quran is saying, we might try to become better guardians of ourselves, initiating a shift in perspective. This means an actual turning around, a metanoia, as they say in Greek, or tauba in Arabic. First, inwardly, we recognize that nature is not separate and different from us, from the human being. There's a group, that there's something that's called human exceptionalism, apparently. But that we are all one, part and parcel of the same divine unity. And there is a calling, as I don't know if any of you have been listening to the book serialized, I think Our Rivers Are Alive by Robert Macfarlane. Apparently in some countries, including strangely Ecuador and I think one of the states in America, they've actually recognized the rights of the river. The river has a right not to be polluted, and they've been to court and they've defended, and the river has won. This needs to happen everywhere. Second, this inward turning around would motivate an outward turning around from, for example, industrial high-yield factory farming to farming with practical reverence for nature. In the last 50 to 60 years, industrialized farming has degraded 1/3 of the Earth's topsoil. Of course, there are many, many statistics one can quote, but that's not what this is about. So I won't be quoting lots of depressing statistics. Unless this inner metanoia takes place, there's little hope for a truly concerted effort towards a restoration of the balance and harmony of nature. Recalling al-Mizan, as I mentioned at the beginning, and I'm sure many of you know, there's actually a group, a foundation called al-Mizan, which is definitely worth looking up and following. So in order to perceive the profound ecological wisdom embodied in the Islamic Gardens of Paradise, we need to take into account the Quranic message of profound interconnectedness, together with the deepest link between the changing manifest world with the imperishable archetypal world. So what is an Islamic garden, I'm often asked? Well, I only have time for a summary here. The true Islamic garden on earth aims to be both a mirror and a foretaste of the eternal gardens of the paradise, jannat al-firdaus, described mainly, as I mentioned at the beginning, in Surah Al-Rahman, chapter 55. Jannah means garden, firdaus means paradise. And in this chapter, the four gardens, chahar-bagh, which means four gardens in Persian, described in fact as two pairs, which has a very profound symbolism, which we afraid can't go into here. But these have come to be this has come to be recognized as the quintessential Islamic garden. There is or should be a perfect balance between the principal components of this garden, which has its beginnings, of course, in the oasis. This, you could say, is the original Islamic garden, the original Islamic garden on earth, because of course the divine original is in the Qur'an, is in the celestial realm. But it provides the two supreme elements of life in the desert, water and shade, as you can see clearly here. And the fourfold watering system, based upon the four directions of space, is the optimum and universal method of irrigation. So this fourfold plan is both physically the best and metaphysically it is the four gardens of paradise. You always get this in traditional societies, the practical and the sort of divine symbolism are completely at one, completely integrated. So the principal components after water and shade and the fourfold form. And also just to say before, of course, Islam, when it entered into Persia, Iran, they inherited this ancient garden prototype, which was the paradisa. Paradise, of course, means paradise, the origin of the word paradise. It also means enclosed by walls, which is another element of the garden, we'll see. So water both flowing and still, if possible, closely followed by shade, an ordered fourfold layout, enclosure, making it a kind of sanctuary. And this is important today because originally it was a sanctuary from the desert. But today, of course, we all long for some kind of sanctuary from the city. Importantly, since its base, the Gardens of Paradise in the Quran are based upon an eternal archetype. This is a reflection of a celestial order, balance and harmony of the garden may help to guide us away from our own endless thoughts towards a more contemplative state. And this is part of the Alhambra Gardens. Very nice balance here between water, architecture, and the green of the vegetation. So this again brings us back to the theme of al-mizan. Transgress not in the balance. This is from the Quran. Today, this phrase, ecological balance, is in reference to the fact that humankind is no longer, of course, in balance or harmony with our natural surroundings. We have not been good caretakers, stewards of the earth. And it clearly doesn't matter what culture or religion we are from. We just need to take heed of these words of keeping in balance, transgressing not in the measure. But we've woefully neglected our role and abused nature horrifically, causing huge species loss and loss of habitation. And shockingly, the UK is in fact one of the most nature depleted countries in the world. But of course, it's difficult to see when we just go out for a walk in the park or in the countryside. It still looks beautiful, but we're on a knife edge, as I'm sure many of you know. And the mass tourism is causing huge damage. I read this not so long ago. If any of you have seen the Disney film Frozen, it was filmed at a place called in Austria, which has 800 inhabitants. It's now swamped with 10,000 tourists a day. This is terrifying. It's a living nightmare. And I think they started at least charging people to come. But still, difficult to know what to do about these things. In another chapter of the Quran, it's written, to quote, "As for the earth, we spread it out and caused everything to grow there in perfect balance." So if all the elements are in proportion in your own paradise garden, they will reflect the order and harmony of heaven, and perhaps help to restore harmony in oneself, because all of us have difficult challenges to overcome in life, and we need help in remaining at balance. I think one of the reasons we like to visit a well-tended garden is because it gives us a taste, for perhaps unconsciously, of celestial harmony and a help towards a more contented state of mind. I'd like to add, particularly because I'm speaking in the UK, but the garden should have this balance between abundant planting, as you see here, as well as the rigor of geometry, representing, you could say, discipline and love. And we would all like to have these in good proportion, crucial for our sanity and well-being. And generous planting is, of course, much easier in a country like this, where we normally have really quite a lot of rain. It's been exceptional in the last month, maybe even in Manchester. I think you've had quite a lot of sun. But statements and statistics about depleted nature are hard, as I just mentioned. When we visit these beautiful gardens, like this one is in Kent, Great Dixter, some of you may know it. But nevertheless, as we know too well, there is huge ecological imbalance, and it's not being restored seriously enough. This is the Sultana Garden, which is in the Generalife, as many of you will know. It's on the hill opposite by the Alhambra. And this idea of enclosure also balance here between the architecture, the water, and the green. So this is the idea of keeping the garden as a private sanctuary, like paradise itself. In fact, jannat means hidden, and it corresponds to the secret and interior world of us all, which we also have to nurture, like the garden. There are so many references in the Quran to flowing water, fountains, shade-giving trees, and the perfect temperate climate of paradise. The calming colour green is only made possible, of course, with water. And it's said in Arabic to be cooling for the eyes, as well as being the colour of spring, of growth and rebirth, and also the colour of hope and of mercy. So it's no accident that in the Quranic descriptions of the Paradise Garden, the colour green reigns supreme and is in fact the colour of Islam. As I expect many people know, it was the Prophet's favourite colour, and he had a green turban. Just to show some variations in water, this is Almeria in the south of Spain. You can see the channel or the rill going down the centre there. Flowing water, this idea of flowing water, and the sound, of course, and the cooling qualities are so important in a hot country. This is one of my favourite fountains in the Port of Myrtles in the Alhambra. So, of course, water is essential for all life on Earth, and as well as providing ablution, we can use water for washing our bodies, as well as symbolically purifying our souls, as we have in Christianity, baptism. Water is also, it's important this, it's a reflection of the soul. It has a deep effect upon us when we are near it. When it's calm, it can calm us. If it's moving, it may energize us. And we are usually drawn to water when walking around a garden. I don't know whether you've noticed this. We end up sitting by it and contemplating it and actually feeling usually rather calmer. This is a lovely 12-foot, rather unusual scalloped fountain in Isfahan. You could see the reflection, of course, which with one little drop of a leaf moves as a reminder of the transience of life. The fountain, this is in the Karaween Mosque, in the center. So the fountain in the center of a mosque or a courtyard or a house, well, a garden, is a kind of living grace at the heart of whichever building this is. And in a way, it corresponds to a fire in a cold country. I mean, we have fires here throughout the, well, most people, of course, don't have fires now. We have central heating, but formerly we had a fire, and it also represented this heart and soul, if you like. Heart and hearth are etymologically closely related. Another component of these gardens is right intention, and this goes hand in hand with an open mind and heart. So if you intend with all humility to make a garden that reflects the jannat al-firdaus, and follow this with an application of certain practical criteria, some of which I've mentioned, then the ecological wisdom of the garden will gradually make itself known. The gardens of paradise, so, are not only clearly founded upon a heavenly garden, but there is always this consciousness of the sanctity of the natural world, which we've mentioned. All levels of nature are bound together. This is central to its ecological wisdom. Nature is a living whole, penetrated by the spirit. Another component is, which I have actually touched upon, but this harmonious interweaving of architecture with the garden, whether it's a small house, a pavilion, or here, famous garden, Patio della Acequia in the Generalife, which was the summer palace of the sultans. Two further important elements in the gardens of paradise are flowers and scent. Roses, beloved, of course, in the Muslim world, just as they are beloved here in the UK, said to have been created by a drop of perspiration from the brow of the Prophet. And sweet-scented herbs are mentioned in the Qur'an. Rayhan literally translates as basil, ultimately recalling our paradisal home. And as many of you know, maybe some of you listening who are in the Arab world, but it's very it's such a important element in that in Arabia and of course elsewhere. But I think very strongly there's a lot of incenses burnt, and as many of you know, is oud and frankincense, much of which comes from that area of the world. I think to reiterate why these gardens encapsulate ecological wisdom, perhaps the most important element is to recognize that they do not arise from an amalgamation of individual elements, but are the expression of a pre-existing order and harmony, the divine unity, as I keep saying, the central message of the Quran, which penetrates all of existence. It is ultimately this principle which is at the heart of the ecological wisdom of the Islamic garden and gives it its particular serene beauty. And therefore, as referred to earlier, gardens may well offer more in the way of solace from daily life. Other gardens are beautiful and they're lovely to sit in, but if you know that it has this intentional sacred element, that it's based upon celestial gardens, it can give you maybe a more sort of profound nurturing nearly at the end now. I'm just going to show a few slides of the Cambridge Moss Garden, which I was involved in. So you see it was a small area. We have a small fourfold plan on either side of the central fountain. Paths, of course, take the place of water rills, often the case, because it's very difficult maintaining and the water and the cost of it. But the primary aim was to work with nature, to encourage biodiversity and to encourage native species by increasing the habitats, to help regain some ecological balance. Anyone designing an Islamic garden today needs to take all these into account with the garden's traditional principles in order to maintain the balance and wisdom that they encompass. This is taken maybe 3 years ago, before it had matured as it has now. We also wanted to use plants which were both typical of the Islamic world, for example, the tulips, as you see here, as well as happy growing in the UK. We used also native crabapple trees, fruit and trees, of course, being key to the Islamic garden. One always has to think of this collaboration, as it were, between what is described in the Qur'an and the context, hugely important, the context. So this is taken more recently, actually probably last summer. So you can see again where the roses have matured, and the salvia here. So that you can see this is naturalistic and abundant planting coming into its own. And of course, only organic compost is used, no artificial fertilizers or insecticides, in order to promote insects and pollinators. So in sharing something of the ecological wisdom of the Islamic garden, together with the close relationship between Islam and nature, I hope that these gardens may be harnessed to make a contribution to the restoration of the natural environment in our ailing world. This is outside the mosque. I mean, it's on the street side, what's called the community garden. You can see a lot of rosemary here, and it's what's called Russian sage or perovskia, lovely blue. But it's good to remind ourselves, and I'm talking to myself here most of all, that nature is not simply a pretty backdrop to our lives, which I think we're all in danger of doing, and it's inevitable when we live in cities. But let's try and remember that we are stewards. It isn't someone else's business, it's our business. And we need to come alive and do something, even if it's just growing something in a pot outside your front door. I mean, and just being aware, and, you know, being aware, of course, of all our rubbish and doing what we can. So we need to nourish our own, that's the outward, but we need to nourish our own sacred center, since this single act can radiate and nourish the sacred energy that flows through the whole of life, all of beings, all of plants, all of nature. To start with, we could, like Robin Wall Kimmerer, her book I mentioned before, as well as the Prince of Wales, now the King, you could start saying, greeting trees, as they do in the Native American Indians. Thanking, for example, the poppy here for its beautiful colour and the rose for its scent, especially at this time of year. I'm sure any of you who have gardens will be just overcome with the abundance that's bursts forth now. This is not sentimentalism. I think this is very important. It really is not sentimental. It's showing gratitude for what is vital for us all. And you only have to look at a view without any green at all, which was a depressing view. Oh, sorry, that's the wrong. This is just a lovely picture of a fairly wild garden of one of my co-designers. I mean, I walked across Millennium Bridge not that long ago. How depressing is this? And the more we see how impoverished our surroundings are, the more we have to do something, the more aware we become of the depth and meaning of the whole of nature. As the great 13th century Persian poet Saadi said, he wrote, to quote, "To the eye of a discerning man, every leaf upon a growing tree is a book imparting knowledge of our Creator. So if we are discerning, the Paradise Gardens of Islam offer us a wealth of ecological wisdom, a taste of the divine unity. Professor Nass, to go back to the great writer on this subject, has written that, to quote, "To be at peace with the earth, one must be at peace with heaven." And let's remember that the only word spoken in the Jannat al-firdaus is salam. It is peace. Thank you very much. That's the end.
Thank you very, very much, Emma. I think you can stop sharing your presentation so we can move on to the commenting and questions. I have to say your talk has left me in a very contemplative mood.
I know.
Although I am in my closed room here, as you mentioned earlier, I am based in Manchester. And yes, we have been, I should say now, suffering from quite dry weather. Shockingly, the garden is yellow, which only happens on very rare occasions. And for the first time since I've been living in Manchester, about 20 years, I was happy that it rained 2 days ago.
Yes, yes,
we actually welcomed it. And it reminded me of the fact that we are encouraged to pray to God, make invocations, dua, when it rains. And it's sometimes difficult to understand why when it rains a lot. But when it doesn't rain for a while, you do actually understand the wisdom and necessity of prayer, of making dua when it rains, because it is an amazing blessing. Coming from France, I have been able to compare the feelings of cities in France compared to the UK, and I have to say that it is a blessing. Although you say, yes, there's a lot of depletion happening on a day-to-day basis. Wherever you step out, you will see green in the UK, you will see trees, you will see parks with grass you can sit on, you can walk barefoot on the grass. Here in France, it is quite difficult to find, and people who have been visiting Paris, for instance, but could be other places, Toulouse, Nîmes, whatever. It is really difficult to find those spaces. So we are blessed here, and having a lot of water, a lot of rain is very helpful. So I just a few words that came out sort of from your speech, which really struck me, and it seems to be like 3 main key words. The first one being obviously mizan, which is spelled, for those who are not familiar with Arabic, in English we spell it M-I-Z-A-N, if you want to look it up, for all its sort of broad range of meanings. But yes, as you said, it generally means balance. And then you have reciprocity and interconnected, that leads to interconnectedness. But
Yes.
I think it also leads to our responsibility, as you mentioned, to take care of that environment and what we have been given. And the final word was gratefulness. And so crucial. As I said, I was grateful for that rain. And sometimes we forget, when we get a bit too much of something, we forget what the blessing that is, but also to remember that this is through Allah's generosity, God's generosity, Allah Kareem, generous, and also his mercy, Ar-Rahman, the merciful. It's only through his mercy and generosity that we get all this, and we have to try and remember this. That, and all of these words lead to that harmony that we are all really yearning for. Ultimately, as human beings, we yearn for that harmony, that beauty, and that perfection that we are all praying, hoping, and striving to achieve and reach Jannat al-firdaus, the gardens of paradise. So thank you so much. It really sort of has boosted and I hope everyone who's been listening to your talk is now feeling sort of wanting to go out and go on those nature walks barefoot, or hug a tree, go on a forest bath. All of these, we call them new age, but ultimately they're not. They're just going back to what our sort of nature calls for. just to go back. So thank you so much. It was beautiful. So we have just a few questions and comments, if you don't mind. The first one, very briefly, practical one. If you could show the book again that you mentioned at the very beginning.
Oh yes,
So people can take a
it's
note.
hard to see. Can you see?
Yes, it's Of the Land and the Spirit, the Essential Lord, Northbourne on Ecology and Religion, including a correspondence with Thomas Merton. So everybody can see very well. Thank you very much.
It's published by World Wisdom Books, which is in America, but you can
Find it online easily. Yes. Okay. Thank you very much.
Yeah, he's much neglected.
So there was one question, among others, which let me just go back to it to read it exactly as it was phrased. So our listener here, a member of the audience here said, for warm weather climates, a water fountain is often used as a central feature, as you said. You mentioned that in the UK, fire is the heart and hearth of the home. So would it be more appropriate to use some kind of fire-based centerpiece, like a fire pit, for instance? I guess in a garden, that's what they mean, instead of a water-based one. What would you say?
I think it's weird. I mean, I would say both of them have, as I was saying, the same sort of symbolic, very bit powerful meaning. I think perhaps it depends on where you live. Personally, I probably would prefer to have water. I mean, one thing about the water, it depends on the water feature as well, but you really want to have water for birds, and you also want to have water for insects. I don't know if any of you have been watching the Chelsea Flower Show in the last week, but there were one or two very nice sort of very simple plain. There was one particularly plain fountain pool. It wasn't a fountain, it was just a pool. And I did wonder how they kept it clean. And I mean, it's only there for a week. Yeah, it depends. Or on the other hand, if you really love cooking and your fire pit and you tend to go out at night and sit around a fire, and it probably will be useful for longer months in the year. I think it's up to you, but they both have a very similar meaning. But obviously the water one is going to recall the Islamic Paradise Gardens more. And the other one is going to be it's more relevant for this country, let's say. But they do both, they're both two of the four major elements.
What I found, especially with children, fire has got a great sort of power of attraction. My children always ask me to go in the garden and put a fire on. They don't care what weather it is, what temperature it is. If you put some kind of little fire on, they just completely just attracted by it, like moths to a light. So it's got that power of attraction, but obviously for practical reasons, it's not particularly feasible to have a fire going on like you would have a fountain on a water.
It's true. I mean, I think it's very interesting here, because what I was saying about this close relationship between practicality and deep symbolism. I mean, I've noticed it depends on the weather. I mean, you'd say that I'm sure children do all, love to go to the fire. They also absolutely love playing in water. There's up near the Aga Khan Centre, near King's Cross, there's a sort of one of these huge granary square, lots of fountains. They appear and disappear, and children absolutely love it. I think both of them really, whoever asked, I mean, of course.
So we could say we could have both. Why not?
Both, exactly.
There's another question sort of along the similar lines, but more specifically about the Islamic garden. What would you say are the key hard landscaping components of an Islamic garden, especially in a UK context, if you can say that?
The key hard landscaping, well, if you're talking about the pathways, for example, which is probably the greatest, the area, I would say it depends on the area you're in. Again, as I said, context is everything. I mean, you wouldn't use brick paths, for example. I would probably not use them in Devon and Cornwall, but you would use them in the southeast because brick is used a lot. So, I mean,
Is there particular rules, like for an Islamic garden, to say, okay, this is an Islamic garden? Say when you approach the brief for a Cambridge mosque, you talked about flowers from abroad, from Islamic countries, but as well local flowers. Was there something else maybe in the way you structured things? You talked about the 4 lines. Is there anything that you would say,
Yes.
if you wanted to have an Islamic garden, you'd have to have these features?
I mean, first of all, you have the limitations of the site, and within those limitations, yes, I think the 4-fold form is crucial, but you can can interpret this in really a huge number of ways according to the mosque, the garden, the house, wherever you are. And you will fit in, you will use, I mean, I would, in the hard landscaping, if you're able to, if you have the means, if it's large enough, you would use some kind of geometry, because of course geometry is one of the key elements of all Islamic art, and geometry is completely universal. It underlies almost every art, every sacred art. So, and again, with the Cambridge Mosque we used, if you can, again, it's all to do with also to do with your budget, I'm afraid. But I mean, any kind of limestone is beautiful, and you could probably use that in most parts of the country. But you have to. So this is, the hard landscaping. I mean, there are things, obviously your fountain, what's your fountain going to be made of? That's another, again, these are things you have to weigh up and see what is the design of your fountain. Make sure that the hard material, the stone or stone or marble used for the fountain is hard, because otherwise the water, it dissolves it. You know, I did a fountain I did a garden in Riyadh in Saudi Arabia, and I chose the local stone, which was actually not intelligent of me, because that local stone is actually it was soft and sandy, and the water started to wear it away. I mean, this is a big subject, but you really need to look at something in specific. You know, you look at your own, and I would always usually I would go local, but again, you be wary of you if you're doing a fountain. Be wary of the water, because you can use these also edgings we had some edgings. I'm trying to think what we used. I think we may have used some metal, this copper edgings to the paths. And then there's galvanized steel, which is used quite a lot now. Doesn't sound very nice. I'd rather, you'd always, on the whole, use natural materials, of course. But again, you have to weigh that up as well, because wood doesn't last very long. If you've got a wooden container, for example, there's some very good containers. I don't know who asked the question, but it's a very good planting scheme near King's Cross, which has been developed over the last 10 to 20 years. They've got some enormous, I think they're galvanized steel, some kind of zinc, and they actually look quite good. They're a deep rust color, but with wonderful planting. And then with a sort of pale coloured stone underneath, this kind of York stone type. It's a question one can go on and on about.
Yes, definitely. I think just to go back on the idea of harmony, and yes, you can have an idea of an Islamic garden, but ultimately we could say an Islamic garden is the one that brings harmony, brings good structure, using the local material, is at one with the local nature basically, and local traditions. That could be the definition.
There are plenty of gardens which are also, people I work with in Somerset, they're extremely good because they're very keen on ecological restoration. And in fact, I worked with them on the Islamic Garden. But they will always look at any good garden designer, and there's some really good garden designers in this country and in America, actually, where you always look at the local, and you can. But I mean, what's interesting, Sophia, is you can have all these. You can have this beautiful planting, like that garden I showed at Great Dixter. It's wonderful, but I suppose knowing that it doesn't have it doesn't have this sort of celestial garden, if you like, as the image, as the paradigm. It does have, that means there has something else there, particularly obviously if you're Muslim, and it's going to resonate. But I mean, sometimes I'm sure many people have experienced the same, just going into any good, beautiful garden. I mean, it's one of the last things that we do well here. not going to last, is it? Who knows?
Yeah, so you would be able to compare with other countries you visited where they don't really have so much of a tradition of the garden, not necessarily because of climate difficulties, but it's just not in their culture compared to, you find possibly that it's more prevalent in countries that have been influenced more by Muslims in the past, or
are you talking about Islamic gardens here?
yeah, it's just generally speaking, the tradition of gardening. You said that here, where this is one of the things that British people are good at, is a good garden, even on individual basis. Do you find, I don't know if in your travel, I don't know if it's too big a question, but if you were able to see that there are differences in different countries in terms of the tradition?
There definitely are. I mean, of course, yes, there are. I mean, some people absolutely love Italian gardens and they go on about it. And French gardens are very known for their formality. And I'm not so keen on the formal garden. And in fact, you know, people have said to me, well, I don't really like Islamic gardens. And then I have to sort of enlighten them to say, because people tend to think they're very formal. And that's partly perhaps because of the climate. I mean, even that first slide I showed of the Taj Mahal garden, which is partly because I want to show how important the garden is to the Taj Mahal itself. But you have there, where you have the water, of course, and you have this sort of geometric pattern in the grass, which is interesting. And so the whole Mughal gardening tradition has its in different parts of the Islamic world, you get slightly different, obviously you get different interpretations, as you do with all Islamic art and architecture. But there are differences. I mean, I don't want to even say, I don't want to think that there's a country in particular which doesn't love its gardens. I just think there is something I think special here, in that in a sense everybody loves a lovely thing, and especially you have this Chelsea flower show, and you know, people who really don't have very much, you know, it doesn't matter what walk of life you come from, what background, what creed, what even economic background, people love it and they will interpret it in their own way. There's something sort of charming about that. On the other hand, in the past, you see, the British have gone around the world, as you know, and they've imposed lawns. I mean, if you go to the Humayun's tomb, for example, and the Taj Mahal, I think if you look at earlier pictures of these places, they're much lusher. So there was a certain, you know, again, all countries have gone through some kind of evolution, as it were, and development in their own gardening styles. And it's really very different now even than it was 30 to 40 years ago in this country. As you know, the whole naturalistic garden movement, and now the sort of rewilding movement, which I think is necessary because we have depleted nature so much. I also haven't answered your question, but I don't really like, I mean, you know, there are, for example, in Europe, they love statues, and they, you know, Italian gardens and French gardens, you get these sort of, there are a lot of statues, and I think this is my sort of Muslim practice now. I don't really like any statues. I like to have it quite minimal in that sense, and water, and because you can create so much out of water. I mean, I haven't touched upon this, but these wonderful sort of carved chadors, they're called, which is carved slabs of sort of a shawl of water. That's what chador means, and they're carved in beautiful patterns, so the water falls down, and it creates lovely patterns in light and also sound.
Yes, it's very lively, isn't it? It's like a statue is pretty much that, and static.
Yeah, this is sacrilege to some people. They just love statues.
Yeah, but water definitely, it's very living.
And it can be interpreted in so many ways, because, and then these things called chini-khanas, these lovely little sort of niches in the wall where they used to have, this is particularly Mughal gardens actually, and they used to have little candles, and then the water fell in front of the candles, so you got the lights flickering through the water. Needed a lot of people to look after them.
Very true, very true. I was wondering if the the concept that was developed at the Cambridge Mosque has been copied elsewhere that you know of, or you've been approached to do it for other mosques, maybe as a part of a refurbishment or as part of a new mosque being built anywhere?
Yes, I mean, it has. I'm actually working on something at the moment near Birmingham. So yes, they have. I mean, it's difficult. It costs money, and people, many mosques in this country, it's difficult. You have to raise funds. They did an extraordinary job at Cambridge. It's a very small garden. I mean, I don't think
It is. Yeah.
I think Kasra was talking about visiting. But we got as much in as possible, and it does. And having just come back from Istanbul with our students, and Ottoman gardens are very different, actually, completely different. In fact, they're much more European. But I mean, it is on part of Europe, part of it, and on the edge. But they have gardens surrounding the mosques, which is not true of necessarily other parts of the Islamic world. It depends. So I think because as we're talking about depletion of nature, if one can have that little bit of garden space before you go in to pray, it's lovely, because you can sit by the water and give yourself time, and you can, as it were, prepare yourself for prayer.
It's like a buffer, isn't it, from the hustle and bustle? And then, as you said, it's quite small. I've visited it, but it doesn't feel small in the British context.
Good.
To be honest, because we're used to having just a little bit of a gate, a tiny bit of front yard, maybe some bushes or some planted pots, and then the front door. So this is obviously bigger. So I like that sort of transition, definitely. And obviously, when you enter the mosque, that powerful smell of wood,
yes,
is absolutely amazing. I mean, I really encourage anyone to just go there, not just for the architecture, but to actually smell something we don't smell anywhere, in no church, in no other building other than this place. It is quite an amazing experience just for that smell.
Really, that's interesting. Yes, I was there quite recently. You forget. You're absolutely right.
Yes.
There's a lot of beautiful geometry there, which was designed, drawn by my former teacher, Keith Critchlow. And yes, and you get these different zones, as you say. You have to have this sort of separation from the street. And, there's a bus stop there, which I think we originally tried to move, but actually it's now quite nice. People can sit at the bus stop and have a nice view.
Yes, exactly. So someone was asking to just repeat exactly where this garden is. We're talking about the garden outside, just in front of Cambridge Mosque, the new Cambridge Mosque
In
in
Mill
the
Road.
UK. Sorry?
It's in Mill Road, Cambridge. Very easy to look up.
Exactly. Someone is asking, I'm not entirely sure I'll be able to pronounce it properly, but what is the name of the chink in the wall? Chinikasa sounds like. Please say it again.
Yes, I think this is I don't think it's Persian. Chador is Persian. That this is for the shawl of water. Chini Kana, Chini, and then hyphen Khana. It might be Hindi, Urdu. I'm not somebody who might know. Might be Persian. But this is the one where you have all these niches in the wall, and then they put either flowers in the niches or candles. It's lovely. Chador, Chinikana. Trying to think, but if you look at there's just some beautiful designs. There's one, actually maybe Mughal gardens in particular. They've done a sort of like a spiral design in the hard landscaping, and then within that there's water. But a lot of these have, I mean, some of you will have visited more recently than me, but a lot of the water is not maintained because it's so expensive. And a garden, and actually there's a garden in Isfahan called the Chahar-bagh garden. A big courtyard, but then it's divided into 4. But there's no water because they can't afford to keep the water going. And without the water, as there really is no life. It feels very, well, literally dry, but also sort of metaphorically dry as well.
Yes, I mean, you mentioned different gardens, and there is obviously many people will be familiar with the garden inside the Paris Mosque, the central mosque,
That's very nice.
which it's quite interesting because, you know, obviously it's surrounded by very high walls, and you're only really aware of it once you go through the doors. And we visited last year in August during the Olympics, and the water there was green.
Oh, was it?
It was so hot. It was just impossible to maintain, you know, all that sort of algae was growing. And you were mentioning about the Cambridge Garden and how it's difficult to emulate because it requires funds not just to build but also to maintain. You have to have staff who knows who knows what they're doing, and not just the water but people. And but I've seen pictures afterwards, a few months later, probably in the winter, where you could see the water again in Paris. In Paris Mosque was again clear.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things you just have to, yeah, just accept that it's not going to be perfect and beautiful all the time.
No, I mean, when I was in Cambridge 2 weeks ago, it was tragic because we had a sort of gathering there, and the fountain wasn't working. And that happens a lot. They've tried practically every plumber in Cambridge, and it shouldn't be quite so difficult.
Mm,
But
mm,
it's ongoing, and it's like with ourselves, our inner selves. It's ongoing. You don't just finish the garden and there you are. The next day,
exactly.
something else comes up that you have to deal with inside.
Yeah, so I think that was a very nice a link as well with the spiritual, the divine, the higher self, which is that you consider your faith as well, your life in general, your personal development, like a garden you constantly tend to, and you just don't leave it to grow kind of haphazardly. And interestingly, that leads me to a comment I wanted to make about France. Yes, they do love the very structured garden. And recently, there's been a campaign over the last few years, I'd say, but more recently, a campaign every summer or every spring to let the grass grow and let the all those flowers grow, so that actually the bees and the insects can come and gorge themselves on that new food after the winter, because people tend to cut the grass a bit too early. And I think in the UK now there has been much more this tendency of leaving lawns to grow. I mean, we definitely did our tiny little patch. We left it to grow, and it was beautiful to see so many different colors. All of those flowers that are considered pests, and you know, growing. No, for me, they have a very important role to play. And once they're gone, they're gone. Just cut your grass. So that was, you know, that's again this idea of constantly tending to garden, letting grow. Sometimes you let a bit of a mess, and then you can sort it out again. So
Yeah, I'm just going to plug. I can see my battery's low. Just 1 second.
absolutely, you go and do that. I'm going to have a look in the meantime if there's anything that we can still look at. So someone said, basically explaining, you can see it on the chat, that that word chinicana, spelled Chini and then Khana, originated in Persia in the early 17th century as an architectural device for the display of precious Chinese porcelain. So it means porcelain house.
Right. Well, they used it. The Mughals obviously used it well, in their gardens to make this very sort of pretty sort of display of.
So one final comment we can finish on, which is there's a trend to bring the outside in. So what are your thoughts on representing this, either garden side going outside? I'm not entirely sure what I mean. It's like try to maybe, I suppose it has to do maybe with the changing climate, or people wanting to be more connected with nature inside.
Well, originally, I mean, this idea of the garden carpet, which is in fact, it was the first job I was involved in when the now king, but he was Prince of Wales in 2000, and he had two carpets, and he decided to make a garden out of them. Originally, the idea was that you brought the garden inside by having a garden carpet. I mean, this is mostly in Iran, but there are other countries as well. And India actually. spectacular garden carpets, which you can see in the V&A, or in fact the what's that famous museum called, beginning with W, in Manchester?
The Whitworth Art Gallery.
The Whitworth Art Gallery has a particularly beautiful one. It's called the
Yes.
Wagner carpet, which I wrote about for my thesis many years ago at the Royal College of Art. So that was one way of bringing the outside in. Obviously, not all of us can have these spectacular, huge carpets, or we have rooms to put them in. But I don't. Does the questioner just mean having houseplants? I'm not sure.
I suppose something to bring, yeah.
What they mean. I mean, I think definitely anything inside. I mean, particularly for people who live in flats. I mean, I've got a very tiny patch in a ground floor flat in London, but so I'm very lucky. But for those who live in flats, especially if you've got a balcony, yeah, no, of course, have as much as you can inside that you can look after. If you've got the space, it's really all to do with space.
Definitely, I don't think there's
it helps you.
have...
I mean, I'm also, you know, as you know, essentially, I'm talking about the inner garden as well. So, and those plants inside will probably help sort of calm one's sort of inner garden.
We know that plants as well purify the air. Some plants are particularly good at, from the toxins and the particles that are the pollution. So they're always good. And I believe we can never have too many plants inside, for sure. You just have to remember to water them.
Yeah, exactly.
But they're right in front of you, so they do tell you when they need to be.
Actually, it is rather lovely when you walk past a tree. If you're really conscious, you can sense that the air is cleaner, just
Definitely.
for that sort of couple of seconds or something.
And it's just so nice to see. So we're just going to close on just a couple of practical questions. The first one, I've been asked to ask you to show the book again, and this time I will not speak, so that the image doesn't move from you.
Which one? I'll show both.
The very first book you showed, whichever book you want to show, but the very first one, and I'll stop talking now. And you can speak. If you can't tell us about it, then the image, basically the screen will be on you.
Lord Northbourne. I mean, please look him up. I mean, he's interesting because he I believe he entered Islam, and for that time, he died in the 70s, I think. And this is an amalgamation of several books. It's called The Essential Lord Northbourne. And he wrote one of the books that they've taken extracts from is called Looking Back on Progress. But anyway, if anyone looks at this, and they can see which books they've taken extracts from. He's I think he's marvelous. But I do also think that Braiding Sweetgrass is, I mean, this was published about 3 years ago. I mean, many people will know of Robin Wall Kimmerer because she lives it. You know, she's a botanist or a biologist or both, a scientist. So she looks at it from the scientific point of view as well as from the Potawatomi Nation point of view. One of her stories is when I was talking about greeting trees, she says, I had to go and see my grandmother to ask her advice about something. And when you're reading it, you'll think, oh, she's driving somewhere to see her grandmother. And of course, she's going to a tree to ask advice from the tree. And it just seems so normal.
Thank you.
Ask advice from our trees.
Indeed, and they would have a lot of stories to tell. The last question, I don't know if you can answer, but someone was asking if there's any way they can contact you privately. Do you have like a professional email that they can use, or?
Can I give it to you afterwards? I don't really want to. Because it would just go. I'd like it just to go to that particular person.
That particular person. So I think maybe that particular person should contact MACFEST.
Yes,
directly on their website. There is an email you can contact MACFEST and ask to be put in contact with Emma.
Yes,
and,
that would be fine.
You will be given their email and you can contact them back.
Thank you very much. Yes.
You're very welcome. I totally appreciate that. Thank you very much, Emma. It was just such a wonderful, inspiring, exactly as we expected it. So we hope that you will come out of your self-imposed exile from online talks and conferences, and we'll see more of you, because we do really need to hear more of these inspiring talks and connection with nature. So thank you very much, Mel. Bless your work. May
Thank
you
you
have
very
many
much
more
for
opportunities.
organising all this.
You're very welcome. And now I'm going to pass it over to Katarzyna from MACFEST. Thank you, everyone, for listening.
Thank you so much, ladies. Emma, thank you so much for your absolutely fascinating presentation. So inspiring, honestly. I think not only me will now go into the garden, my garden, and just have a think, what could I change? Just to create like a little sacred space, because in fact, I do understand what you're talking about, that feeling when you are surrounded by the sacred geometry. There's just something in the air that you can feel. It's different. So calming, just beautiful. So thank you so much for probably confirming a lot of the things that people could feel or were thinking about, and you just laid it out for us. And Sophia, thank you for wonderful hosting again. It was lovely to have you. And before we close today, I just wanted to invite people to our upcoming events. And so we've got Narrating the Unknown, Arabic travel writing and cultural discovery on next week on Saturday. We do have a couple of live events on Tuesday, 10th of June. It's an event about Persian jam making. So please take a look if you would like to attend it. The tickets are on Eventbrite. We've got an event at the Lowry in Salford on Saturday, 21st of June. And there is another digital event, Islamic Architecture, more sacred geometry on Sunday, 15th of June. And just one more thing before we go away, we've got still the process of submitting your work. It's still open. You can submit your photographs, your calligraphy drawings on paintings. If you're a Muslim artist or a creative living in the UK, the submission process is free, and you can do that on MACFEST website. We're having more thanks from the audience in the chat. Thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you for participating in the conversation.
Thank you very much, and to Sophia, very good hosting, and you, Kasari, I can't pronounce your name. And
It's
Tom
okay.
and Katra, very wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ladies. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Assalamu alaikum.